February 19th, 1945. Iwo Jima. The flamethrower was the most feared weapon on the battlefield. Not the most powerful, not the most accurate, but the most terrifying. Because it didn't just kill, it burned. Alive. Private first class. Robert Chen carried an M2A17 flamethrower up the black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima's beaches. 70 pounds of equipment strapped to his back. 2 tanks of napalm-thickened fuel. Pressurized. Connected to a handheld nozzle that could project burning fuel 40 yards. Chen's job was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Approach Japanese bunkers and fortified positions. Get close enough to aim, then burn everything inside. The Japanese on Iwo Jima had built over 11 miles of underground tunnels, hundreds of bunkers, fortified positions with concrete and steel, machine guns covering every approach, artillery pre-sighted on every landing zone. It was the most heavily defended island in the Pacific, and the only way to clear the bunkers was direct assault, with flamethrowers. Chen's unit, Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 28th Marines, had been fighting for 3 days, pushing inland from the beaches, meter by meter, bunker by bunker. The casualties were horrific. Over 30% of the company was already dead or wounded, but they kept advancing, because there was no other way. On the morning of February 19th, Chen's platoon was ordered to assault a Japanese strongpoint, cluster of bunkers overlooking the advance route, machine guns, mortars, maybe 50 Japanese soldiers. Standard assault procedure: infantry suppresses, flamethrower advances, burns out the bunkers, infantry clears what's left. Chen had done this 5 times in 3 days. Each time he'd approached close enough to burn. Each time he'd felt the heat from his own weapon, felt the backwash of flames, smelled the burning. Each time he'd survived. Barely. But this time would be different. This time, Chen's platoon would be pinned down, cut off, and Chen would be the only thing standing between his surrounded unit and total annihilation. What Chen didn't know yet, what he couldn't have predicted, was that the next 3 hours would test not just his courage, but his willingness to keep fighting when everyone else was dead or wounded, when ammunition was gone, when the only weapon that still worked was the one strapped to his back, the one that made him a target, the one that turned him into the most hated man on the battlefield. Because Japanese soldiers feared flamethrowers more than anything, and they focused fire on flamethrower operators above all other targets. Chen knew this. Every flamethrower operator knew this. Average life expectancy in combat: 4 minutes. Chen had already beaten those odds, but his luck was about to run out. Who was Robert Chen? Robert Chen was born in 1923 in San Francisco, California, Chinatown. His parents had immigrated from China in 1919, opened a restaurant, worked 18-hour days, built a life. Robert grew up in that restaurant, working the kitchen, learning to handle intense heat, industrial stoves, flames, boiling oil. By age 14, Robert was working the wok station, where everything was done over high flames. Fast, precise, dangerous if you weren't careful. Burns were common. Small ones, occupational hazard. Robert learned to respect fire, to control it, to work with it without fear. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, Robert was 18. He enlisted the next day. His father tried to stop him. "This isn't your war. You're Chinese, not Japanese." Robert said, "I'm American. This is my country. My war, yo." The Marines accepted him, sent him to boot camp, then infantry training, then specialist training. Robert scored high on everything: physical fitness, marksmanship, combat readiness. But when they asked for volunteers for flamethrower training, most men looked away. Everyone knew what flamethrowers meant: high casualties, terrible deaths, target priority for enemy fire. Robert stepped forward. "I'll do it," The training instructor looked at him. "Son, do you understand what you're volunteering for?" "Yes, sir. Flamethrower operators don't last long in combat." "I understand, sir. But someone has to do it." The instructor nodded. "Why you?" Robert thought about the restaurant, about working with fire every day for 10 years. "I'm not afraid of fire, sir." That was only partially true. Robert was afraid. But he'd learned to work through that fear, to control it, the same way he controlled flames in the kitchen. Flamethrower training was 6 weeks, learning the M2A17 system, 2 fuel tanks, compressed nitrogen propellant, igniter mechanism, range 20-40 yards depending on wind and fuel mixture, duration 10 seconds of continuous fire, safety procedures, tactical employment, and, most importantly, how to survive when everyone was trying to kill you. Because flamethrower operators were priority targets. Japanese doctrine specifically instructed, kill the flamethrower first. Robert learned to move fast, to stay low, to never stay exposed longer than necessary. By January 1945, Robert had been assigned to the 28th Marines, preparing for the invasion of Iwo Jima. He'd never used his flamethrower in combat, never burned anyone, never felt what it was like to watch people die from fire you created. That would change on February 19th, and Robert would learn that training prepared you for the technical aspects, but nothing prepared you for the reality of burning human beings alive. The strong point. The Japanese bunker complex that Chen's platoon was ordered to assault had been built into the base of a ridge, reinforced concrete, 3 feet thick, steel doors, multiple firing ports, interconnected by tunnels. 6 separate bunkers in a cluster, each one covering the approaches to the others, interlocking fields of fire. The Japanese defenders, approximately 40 soldiers, had been waiting for the Americans, had prepared for weeks, stockpiled ammunition, pre-aimed their weapons, registered mortar fire on every approach route. They knew the Americans would come, and they were ready. Chen's platoon, 3rd Platoon, Charlie Company, began their assault at 800 hours. Standard tactics: infantry advance under covering fire, suppress the bunker firing ports, get close enough for the flamethrower to be effective. Chen moved forward with the assault team, staying low, using cover. The volcanic rock and shell craters provided some concealment, but not much. The Japanese opened fire at 100 yards. Machine guns, rifles, grenades. The Marines went to ground, returned fire, but couldn't advance. The Japanese were too well protected. Every time Marines tried to move forward, they were cut down. After 30 minutes, the platoon had 3 dead, 7 wounded, and hadn't advanced more than 20 yards. The platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Morrison, called Chen forward. "Chen, we need you to burn that left bunker. Can you get close?" Chen studied the terrain. 50 yards to the bunker. Open ground for the last 20. Completely exposed. "I can try, Sergeant. I need more than try. Can you do it?" Chen looked at the bunker, at the machine gun firing from the main port, at the bodies of Marines who'd tried to advance. "I'll do it." Morrison organized covering fire. "On my mark, everyone shoots at that bunker. Keep their heads down. Chen, you move when they fire. Fast, don't stop." Chen checked his flamethrower. Fuel tanks, full. Pressure, good. Igniter, armed. He took a deep breath. Morrison. "Ready? 3, 2, 1, fire!" Every Marine with a working rifle opened up, concentrated fire on the bunker. Chen ran. 70 pounds of fuel and equipment on his back. 20 yards. Machine gun fire kicking up volcanic sand around him. 30 yards. A bullet grazed his helmet. 40 yards. Close enough. Chen dropped to one knee, aimed the nozzle, squeezed the trigger. The flamethrower roared. A stream of burning napalm shot forward. 40 yards. Arcing through the air, hitting the bunker's firing port. Flames poured inside. Chen held the trigger for 3 seconds, then released. Through the port, he could see flames. Smoke. Then Japanese soldiers ran out the back entrance, on fire, screaming. Chen looked away, couldn't watch. But he heard the rifle fire from his unit, putting them down. Mercy. 1 bunker cleared. 5 more to go. Chen ran back to his platoon. Morrison grabbed him. Good work. Rest. We'll hit the next one in 5. But they never got the chance, because at 08:45 hours, the Japanese counterattacked. Not from the bunkers, from the tunnels beneath them. They emerged from hidden positions, behind the Marines, flanking them, surrounding them. And 3rd Platoon was cut off. The encirclement. The Japanese counterattack came from 3 directions. 40 soldiers, maybe more, armed with rifles, grenades, and bayonets. Fanatical, determined, willing to die to kill Americans. 3rd Platoon was 32 men. After casualties, 25 still combat effective. They formed a defensive perimeter, 50-yard circle, everyone facing outward, fighting in all directions simultaneously. The fighting was close quarters, hand-to-hand in places, grenades thrown back and forth, rifle fire at 10 yards, 5 yards. Brutal. Chen crouched behind a volcanic rock outcrop, his flamethrower useless in this kind of fight. Too close, too chaotic. He couldn't risk friendly fire, so he fought with his pistol. .45 caliber M1911, standard sidearm for flamethrower operators. He fired at Japanese soldiers charging the perimeter. Hit 2, missed 3. The magazine emptied. He reloaded. Last magazine. Around him, Marines were falling. Chen saw Morrison go down. Chest wound. Still alive. Calling for a corpsman. The platoon's medic, Doc Williams, was already treating 2 other wounded. Couldn't get to Morrison. Chen crawled over, dragged Morrison behind cover, applied pressure to the wound. Morrison grabbed his arm. Chen, we're surrounded. Need to break out. Can't hold this position. Where's the lieutenant? Dead. You're in charge of the flamethrower. Use it. Too close, Sergeant. I'll hit our own men. Morrison coughed, blood on his lips. Then get us out of here. Burn a path through them. Chen looked around the perimeter. The Japanese were maintaining distance now. 20 yards, firing from cover, throwing grenades, not charging. They'd learned that charging American positions meant high casualties. So they were waiting, wearing down the Marines, letting time and casualties do the work. Eventually, the Marines would run out of ammunition, or wounded would overwhelm the able-bodied, and then the Japanese would finish them off. Chen made a decision. I can clear the east side. Give us a breakout route. Morrison nodded. Do it. Chen called to the nearest Marine. Corporal Hayes, I'm going to burn the east side. When I do, everyone moves that direction. Understand? Hayes passed the word. Chen checked his flamethrower. Fuel. Maybe 60%. Enough for 1 or 2 long bursts. He positioned himself on the east side of the perimeter. Japanese positions 20 yards away. Behind rocks, in shell craters. Maybe 10 soldiers in that sector. Chen stood up, completely exposed. Made himself a target. The Japanese saw him, saw the flamethrower, started shooting immediately. Bullets impacted around him. One hit his fuel tank. Didn't penetrate. The tanks were armored for exactly this reason. Chen aimed, squeezed the trigger. The flamethrower erupted. Burning napalm streamed across 20 yards. Chen swept the nozzle left to right, covering the entire eastern sector. The Japanese positions disappeared in flames, screaming. Chaos. Chen held the trigger for 5 seconds, fuel gauge dropping fast, then released. The eastern sector was an inferno. Move! 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 Hayes led the breakout. Marines half-carrying wounded, running through the gap Chen had created, through the burning Japanese positions. Chen provided rear guard, turned, fired his flamethrower at Japanese soldiers trying to follow. Short burst, 3 seconds, stopped them. Chen ran, following his unit. Behind him, the Japanese regrouped, started pursuing. But the Marines had a head start. 200 yards, enough to reach friendly lines. Chen was the last one through. Collapsed behind American positions, fuel tanks empty, ammunition gone, but alive. His platoon, what was left of it, had made it out. 18 men. 7 dead. 7 wounded. But alive. Because one flamethrower operator had done what flamethrower operators were trained to do: stand exposed, draw fire, and burn everything in front of them, so others could live. The cost. Chen sat in a shell crater, hands shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline draining, from the realization of what he'd just done. He'd killed maybe 20 men, burned them alive. He could still hear the screaming, could still smell the burning. Would never forget either. A corpsman checked him. "You hit?" Chen looked down. Didn't know. The corpsman found a bullet graze on his left arm. Minor. Another on his leg. Superficial. "You're lucky. Couple inches different, you'd be dead." Chen didn't feel lucky. He felt sick. Morrison was evacuated. Chest wound serious but survivable. Before they carried him away, he grabbed Chen's hand. "You saved the platoon. Don't forget that." Chen nodded, but couldn't speak. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Johnson, came to the position that evening, walked the line, talked to survivors. When he reached Chen, he stopped. "You're the flamethrower operator." "Yes, sir." "Morrison said you burned a breakout path. Under fire. That true?" "Yes, sir." Johnson studied him. "How old are you?" 21, sir." "You look younger." Chen didn't respond. Johnson said, "I'm putting you in for a Bronze Star. What you did today saved 18 men. That matters." "Thank you, sir." After Johnson left, Hayes, now acting platoon sergeant, sat next to Chen. "You okay?" Chen shook his head. "No, none of us are. But you did your job, better than anyone could have expected." "I burned people alive." Hayes was quiet. Then, "Yeah, you did. And I shot people. And Morrison blew people up with grenades. That's war. It's all horrible. But if you hadn't done it, we'd all be dead. So I'm grateful, even if you're not." Chen understood. Logically. But emotionally, he would carry what he'd done for the rest of his life. What Chen didn't know, what he wouldn't learn for years, was that his actions that day had been typical of hundreds of flamethrower operators across the Pacific. Men who did the most terrible job in warfare, who killed in the most horrific way imaginable, and who lived with that forever. Not as heroes, as survivors. Carrying burdens no one should have to carry. The weapon no one wanted. After Iwo Jima, the Marine Corps analyzed flamethrower effectiveness. The data was stark. Flamethrowers accounted for over 40% of Japanese bunker casualties, were essential for clearing fortified positions, could not be replaced by any other weapon system. But flamethrower operators had the highest casualty rate of any combat specialty. Average survival time, under 5 minutes once engaged. Over 80% became casualties within their first 3 engagements. The Marine Corps faced a problem. They needed flamethrowers. But keeping operators alive long enough to be effective was nearly impossible. They revised doctrine. New procedures. 1. Flamethrower operators never advanced alone. 2. Minimum 2 operators per assault team. 3. Covering fire mandatory. 4. Quick strikes only. Approach, burn, retreat. 5. Never stay exposed more than 10 seconds. These changes increased survival rates, but only marginally. Flamethrowers remained the most dangerous job in the infantry. Chen's engagement was studied specifically. Chen breakout maneuver, using flamethrower not to assault a fixed position, but to create an escape route through enemy forces, It was unorthodox, but effective, and it became part of tactical doctrine. When units were surrounded, flamethrower operators could burn a path out. High risk, but viable option when no other options existed. By 1945, every Marine infantry battalion had at least 4 flamethrower teams, trained not just in assault operations, but in defensive use, breakout procedures, rear guard actions. The flamethrower evolved from a specialized assault weapon into a tactical tool for multiple scenarios. All of it built on lessons learned from operators like Chen, who survived long enough to prove what worked. The operator who came home. Chen fought on Iwo Jima for 31 days, until the island was secured. He used his flamethrower 4 more times, survived each engagement, against all odds. When Iwo Jima fell, Chen was one of 6 flamethrower operators in his battalion who were still combat effective. 18 had been killed or seriously wounded. Chen was reassigned to a replacement battalion, preparing for the invasion of Japan. But the atomic bombs ended the war before that invasion happened. Chen returned to San Francisco in December 1945, back to Chinatown, back to the restaurant. His father barely recognized him, not physically, but the way he moved, the way he looked at everything, always scanning, always watching for threats. Chen tried to work the kitchen, but couldn't. The flames from the stove triggered something. Memories. Smells. The sound of screaming. He lasted 2 weeks, then quit. His father didn't understand. "You worked here for years. What changed?" Chen couldn't explain. How do you tell someone that you can't be around fire anymore because every time you see flames, you remember burning people alive? Chen found work in a warehouse, loading trucks, physical labor. No fire, no flames, just boxes and work. He did that for 42 years. Never married, never talked about the war. When people asked, he'd say, "I was a Marine, Pacific Theater." That was all. Chen died in 1998, age 75. His obituary mentioned his work at the warehouse, his service as a Marine. One sentence: awarded Bronze Star for Valor, Iwo Jima, 1945. No mention of the flamethrower. No mention of the men he'd burned. No mention of the platoon he'd saved. Just a medal. And silence. Because Chen never wanted to be remembered as the man who burned people alive, even if he'd done it to save others. The weapon that disappeared today, flamethrowers, are no longer used by the US military. They were phased out in the 1970s, replaced by incendiary grenades and thermobaric weapons. More effective, less traumatic for operators. But during World War II, flamethrowers were essential. The only weapon that could reliably clear fortified bunkers. Over 10,000 flamethrower operators served in the Pacific. Nearly 4,000 became casualties. Highest casualty rate of any specialty. They were volunteers. Every single one. Because no one was forced to carry a flamethrower. The job was too dangerous. Too terrible. But men volunteered anyway. Because someone had to do it. Because without flamethrowers, bunkers couldn't be cleared. Caves couldn't be secured. And infantry couldn't advance. Flamethrower operators were the tip of the spear. The first ones exposed. The first ones targeted. The ones who did the job no one else wanted. And they did it knowing the odds. Knowing the cost. Knowing they probably wouldn't survive. But doing it anyway. Because that's what Marines do. The operators who never came home. There's a memorial on Iwo Jima, at the base of Mount Suribachi, for all the Marines who died there. Over 600 names. Chen's name isn't on it, because he survived. But the names of 14 flamethrower operators from his battalion are there. Men who didn't make it home, who died doing the most terrible job in warfare, burning enemy soldiers out of bunkers, so that others could advance, so that the island could be taken, so that the war could be won. They weren't heroes in the traditional sense. They were specialists, doing a job that had to be done, with a weapon that everyone feared, both enemy and friendly. Robert Chen was one of the lucky ones. He survived, came home, lived a long life. But he carried what he'd done every single day. The faces, the screaming, the smell, the knowledge that he'd killed in the most horrible way possible. Not because he wanted to, but because it was his job. And he did his job, even when it cost him his peace of mind, his ability to work around fire, his willingness to talk about what he'd done. That's the price flamethrower operators paid. Not just the ones who died, but the ones who survived. Robert Chen saved 18 men by burning a path through the enemy. He stood exposed, drew fire, and created hell so others could escape. That's not heroism. That's something else. Something harder to define. The willingness to do the terrible thing because it's necessary, and living with it forever.